What is up, side hustlers, entrepreneurs, business builders, and dream makers? Welcome to the Study Side Hustle Podcast, episode 103. It is great to be back in your earbuds once again. Today, I want to talk to you about, from big picture to smallest, tiniest detail, how I think about the health of any business. So with that being said, let's get into it. So I'm going to kind of draw out like a mental map for you. And hopefully you can follow along in this. Hopefully it's organized enough that you can kind of see through this without any visual aids. Because the way that I think about this is starting off very, very big picture and then zooming into particulars as necessary. So when we zoom out as far as we possibly can, I think most businesses that are sub 7 figures break down to 3 big buckets. And then if they are 7 figures and beyond, then most businesses break down into 4 big buckets. We just add one when we get to a certain level of scale. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the 3 big buckets. And this is going to work for you and model for you well if you don't have a team yet. If you're a solopreneur, or if everybody on your team is freelancers, then this is going to work really, really well for you. If you do actually have a notable team of freelancers, you're going to want to add that 4th bucket at some point. But let's go ahead and zoom in. What are the big 3 when we're out as far back as we can look? The biggest 3 pieces of any business as I see it. They break down to the product or the service, the marketing, and the sales. So each of these buckets comes with one big number that if you understand it, it helps you to understand the health of the business. So when I'm looking at a business, whether it's my own, I do this every Saturday, or whether it's somebody that I'm helping, I ask these 3 big buckets. I want to zoom out first. What's the problem with the business? And I go, okay, so for product or service, the single number that tells me the most I possibly can know about how good your product or service is churn rate. Or you can think of it as like, you can invert that and you can say lifespan of the customer. How long does the customer stay? Or how many times does the customer repurchase? Right? So churn rate is how quickly people cancel when they're on recurring business model. What's your churn rate? That tells me how good your product or your service is. The lower the churn rate, or the higher the retention rate, or the higher the repeat buyer rate, or the higher the referral rate, of just adjusting for different business models, tells you how good the product or service is. It's objective. Numbers don't lie. How good the product or service is, we can learn that from the churn rate. We want the churn rate to be as low as possible. We want the repeat purchase rate to be as high as possible. Okay? In marketing, the number 1 metric that when I'm going as big picture as possible, that's most important to me, is number of new leads per month. Number of new leads per month. If you can tell me number of new leads per month, then I have an idea of where your marketing is standing. And then lastly, sales, number of new customers per month. Tell me that, I can have an idea of how your sales process is working. And when we go zoom back and we look far back, those 3 numbers tell us the health of the business. They tell us how much money the business is making today and how much it'll make over time. I've shown you the breakdown of the 3 numbers and how you use them to know where the business will cap at, things like that. But these are the 3 big buckets. And when I look at those, if one of those is really, really bad, then I can tell you why the business isn't doing well. And if 2 of those are really, really bad, then I can tell you why the business is almost dead. And if all 3 of those are really, really bad, I can tell you why you don't have a business. That's going to be the model that we're going to map at. From there, I'll just go in order. How do I kind of zoom in? Okay, let's say that there's an issue with product or service. The churn rate is high, so I zoom in. Well, fundamentally, that bucket, as best I can tell, zooms into 2 categories. And those 2 categories are the product or service itself and customer experience. It might very well be that your product or service is objectively, on every stand we can look at, phenomenal, but your customer experience sucks. People don't like working with you. And that's why you have a high churn rate. And it might be that the actual fix is, hey, send them a weekly email that's updating them on what's going on with what you do for them. Or possibly both, smile and greet them with their name every time you see them. Could be those simple little tweaks that fix your customer experience and therefore fix your product and therefore lower your churn and therefore increase your business's revenue. Those little tweaks can actually make a really big difference. As I see it, Those are the biggest two categories under product or service, is the actual product itself and customer experience. If the customer experience is phenomenal but the product sucks, then we need to do some product development. If the product is phenomenal but the customer experience sucks, then we need to do some reworking internally on how we interact with our customers. You fix one of those two problems, you fix that bucket. Let's move on to the marketing bucket. You aren't getting enough leads per month to sustain your business. There's a problem in your marketing. As I see it, marketing breaks down to 4 big categories. So when we zoom in to marketing, we're zooming into 4 big categories. Those big categories are warm outreach, their cold outreach, their content, and their ads. And you could be only working in one of those spaces, and that's fine. You can be working in all 4 of those spaces, and that's fine. But those are the 4 big categories. And then each of those big categories has its own subsets, right? Like in cold outreach, you can do cold email, you can do cold calling, you can do door knocking. We can zoom into different specifics, right? And maybe you're doing a lot of these things and maybe you're doing 1 or 2 of them. But first we're just gonna look at zoom in, 4 big categories, zoom into 1 category deeper. So let me just give you an example. I'll kind of do an example out of each of them. So if we zoom into warm outreach for me is your subscriber email list, people who opted into your email list, and then it's like networking. And when we zoom in and we see the actual marketing systems in play, what I'm gonna look at first is KPIs, specific KPIs per whatever we're zoomed in on. And when the KPI doesn't look good, I map that to a lead indicator. What behavior can we change that should affect that KPI that then would affect how many leads we're getting per month that then would affect our revenue? So we're kind of reverse engineering, right? If we're talking about warm email, then the KPIs that we're gonna be looking at are our open rates and our click rates on whatever's inside the email. So we're gonna look at those 2 things. If the open rate is really, really low, then we now know what we actually need to focus on. The lead indicator that maps to open rate is the quality score of the subject line. So now we're gonna focus on writing better subject lines. If the open rate is good, but the click-through rate is bad, then we're gonna focus on probably, like you would think that most people would immediately go, okay, so you need to focus on your copy, you need to write better emails. Yes, however, I would actually say the lead indicator, the biggest lead indicator here is actually value divided by ask. What is that number? What does that ratio look like? You wanna give tons and tons of value and you wanna make very few asks, and that's how you nurture warm audiences. So I would say, how often are you making big asks? And if you're making a big ask with every single email, then is each email giving an insane amount of value before the ask? And if you're only making big asks once a week, then are you giving 5 emails a week and 4 of them are value-based and then 1 of them has an ask? Like, what's your ratio on that? And that's gonna be, for me, the biggest indicator of success, the biggest lead indicator we can focus on when talking about warm email. Okay. Next example, let's say that, let's do 1 example out of cold outreach. So cold outreach might map to cold email, right? So for cold email, again, you have the same kind of basic KPIs. What's your open rate? What's your response rate? Cold email, I'm gonna say, let's go for a response rate. You just want people to reply to the email. If the KPI that's hurting is your open rate, you do the same thing. You look at the quality score of your subject lines, you start testing different subject lines. If it's your response rate, because we're now dealing with cold email, you're not gonna be sending an amazing amount of value every single day because that's just not gonna fly with cold email. These people didn't opt in. What we're gonna look for our primary lead indicator is the value of the offer. How good of an irresistible offer did we give them to make them want to reply? And that's what we focus on. And maybe now we really harp in on the copy because maybe the offer is phenomenal, but we didn't represent it well, which means the offer wasn't phenomenal. Content. Let's say that you're doing organic content marketing. Well, then one of the KPIs, biggest key performance indicator you can get is traffic growth or just traffic. How much traffic are we getting from organic? Are people clicking on the links? Are people moving forward? If we're not getting very much traffic from our organic, then we can look back and we can say, okay, well, on our organic, what kind of engagement are we getting? What kind of reach are we getting? And then when we boil it all the way back, we pull all the way back, the number 1 lead indicator for organic content marketing, as far as I can tell, is quantity. Quantity and then quality. You want to do quality content always, and then you want to do the highest quantity of quality content that you possibly can. And if you can do a high enough quantity of quality content, then you will see that your traffic will grow. And if you can't sustain that, then your organic content marketing is actually only going to work for lead nurturing, not lead generating. So, number one lead indicator, if you have a content marketing strategy, as far as I'm concerned, is what volume of content are you putting out, and then the second lead indicator is how good are you making it. Finally, last one would be ads. You're running ads, Facebook ads, Google ads, TikTok ads, Instagram ads, YouTube ads, those kind of ads, right? Number one KPI is return on ad spend. So if your return on ad spend is low or negative or less than 1, then we're going to walk through our entire funnel process of what are people going through. But the very next step to look at would be, well, what's our click-through rate? If your click-through rate's low, then your ad sucks. And you need to make a better creative, you need to make a better offer, you need to make better copy. When I zoom in to the marketing bucket, and I have these 4 big categories, and someone tells me we actually operate in all 4. I go, great, what do you do in all 4? They tell me what they do in each of the 4. I go, great, I need this KPI, this KPI, this KPI, this KPI. And then when I zoom in more, I'm gonna zoom into whichever KPI of the list that's necessary is worse. And that's what we'll zoom in on first, and that's what we'll fix first with the lead indicators, kind of like the ones I mentioned. Product, service, and marketing, finally sales. If we have a low churn rate and we have a high lead rate, but we have a low sale rate, then we're gonna zoom in on sales. And when we zoom in on sales, the big categories that I see inside sales are prospect tracking, the reminder sequence for the call, the follow-up, and then the sales call. Right? So those are like the 4 areas. If we find that all of the areas look good except sales calls, for example, then you can zoom in on that, and what you're gonna find is that you either have a script problem, and that's because it's a problem across your sales team, or you're going to find that it's a specific salesperson. Now, I mentioned that you only have 3 categories if you probably don't have a team yet. So maybe you only have 1 salesperson. And in that instance, it's really hard to tell if it's a script problem or if it's the salesperson's problem. But here's what I would tell you. If you don't have a sales process that's defined, that you can write standard operating procedures on right now, then it's the script problem. Work on the script first, make a process. Learn a process, use the process I teach. Do something so that you can start having a system, and then you can start, while collecting data, tweaking the system, and then figure out exactly what it is. When it is the salesperson, then we're talking about things like charisma, which we would define as like, well, is the salesperson smiling and using their name? Is the salesperson listening to them? Is the salesperson calm? Those types of smaller details that are harder to quantify, that's when it's a salesperson problem. But if you do have a sales team and it's across the board, sales aren't going well, but everything else on the system looked well, it's a script problem. That's the way that I think about the sales bucket, and those are the 3 buckets that run our businesses. That's how I think about trying to fix a business. I zoom out as far as I possibly can into the 3 big buckets, maybe 4 if it's a larger company, and then bucket by bucket, whichever is hurting worse, I zoom in and I look at KPIs to figure out what's hurting worse, and then I zoom in and I look at KPIs to figure out what's hurting worse, and I zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. And that way we can navigate to the actual biggest leverage problem as quickly as possible, and therefore make a fix as quickly as possible. I hope this is helpful for you. That's all I have for you guys today. I will talk to you again very soon. Love y'all. God bless.